let's get started. We're on the 6th chapter of Amy-Jill Levine's Signs and Wonders. This is the raising of Lazarus, taking death seriously. Okay, if I can get my first one.
Wait, you dropped something?
Yeah, and then I tried to get it and I shoved it further away.
Do you need me to come get it? No, it's right here now. Okay.
Well, the story of raising of Lazarus is only in the Gospel of John. There is a story about Lazarus in Gospel of Luke, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and Lazarus sits outside the rich man's gate. He's covered with sores and he's hungry, and the rich man doesn't do anything. They both die, and then the rich man asks that Lazarus be sent to warn his brothers about where he ended up. But I think they say, well,
I think that's a different Lazarus.
you think it's a different Lazarus?
Yeah, because that was a beggar, whereas this Lazarus apparently was quite well off.
Well, that's true. He was. That's a good point. But that's the only other story about Lazarus is in Luke.
Sad story.
Yeah.
So,
It's Christmas.
so the Gospel of John uses signs and wonders. But what do we use signs for in everyday life? If you're just driving down the highway, what do you use a sign for?
Directions.
Directions.
Which way to go?
Tells us what we're supposed to do, yield,
Okay.
stop.
If you get someplace, what's like you go shopping somewhere, what's on the outside of the store?
The name of the company?
Something that identifies
Yeah.
where you're at that you so those are signs. Well, John's gospel has 7 signs, or signs and wonders is sometimes called, that Jesus performs in his gospel. And this is, we talked about numerology once. So there's 7, the perfect number that point to Jesus' identity. So here are the 7. I was going to ask you, but we'll just run through them. The 7 signs in his gospel: changing the water into wine, healing the official son at Capernaum, healing the paralyzed guy at Bethsaida, feeding 5,000, walking on water, healing the man who was born blind, and last one is raising Lazarus. But Jesus wasn't the first one to raise someone from the dead. You've got Elijah and Elisha in the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. They raised someone from the dead. So just to get familiar with those stories, here's the scripture about Elijah. You want to read that, Steve?
After the son of the woman, became ill, his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. She then said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God?" But he said to her, "Give me your son." He took him from her bosom, carried him up into the upper chamber where he was lodging, and laid him on his own bed. And he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon this widow with whom I am staying by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." The Lord listened to this voice of Elijah. The life of the child came into him again, and he revived. Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, and gave him to his mother. Then Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." So the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true."
Okay. Well, I put Elijah in one time. That was a little deceiving, but okay. Now here's the story of Elisha, and I condensed. There's some dots in there because I tried to condense this one. I kind of summarized this one. Coral, you want to read that one?
Sure. A child complained to his father that his head hurt, and the servant carried the child to his mother. He sat on his mother's lap until noon, when he died. The mother saddled a donkey and sent out to get the man of God, Elisha, at Mount Carmel. Elisha's servant Gehazi laid his staff on the child's face but he did not waken. When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child laying dead on his bed. So he went in and closed the door on the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he got up on the bed and lay upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And while he lay bent over, the flesh of the child became warm. He got down, walked once to and fro in the room, then got up again and bent over him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes.
Okay. What's in bold was is copied from the Bible. So, well, that was just, so here's, I had to, wherever there's dots, I cut some stuff out because it's a long story. So it's 44 verses in the Bible, but
You're not going down to one page.
I condensed.
Nice.
This is the condensed version, like Reader's Digest.
There's clip notes here.
Yeah.
So I'll read that one now. A certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sister sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Jesus, after hearing that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming in the world. And I condensed some stuff. When Mary met Jesus, she also said that Lazarus would not have died if Jesus had been there. And Mary wept, and then Jesus wept. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and the stone was lying against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. So what similarities, if any, do you see between the story of Elijah raising the widow's son and Jesus raising Martha's and Mary's brother? Besides that they were both dead and now they're alive.
Well, I was going to say that. But
Okay, so
I'm
I
sure
took
that's
away.
not what
Well,
you
they
were going to
both
say.
cried to the Lord, or they all prayed to the Lord.
Okay. You want me to go back to Elijah's story?
I think
It's just the
one thing, go ahead, Steve.
I think it's primarily just Jesus asking them, do you believe in me? And if you do, we'll make it happen.
I think one thing Amy Levine pointed out was that the other resurrections were people who had just died. And Lazarus was dead 4 days and already decomposing and smelling and all of that. So I think what was her term, dead is dead or something?
Better than a doornail.
Well, that one, well, okay, I won't use Elijah. Elisha, though, she had to saddle the donkey, go somewhere. It wasn't like he was been dead for 2 minutes. It was hours
But
at
he
least.
wasn't in the tomb or anything yet, though. For
No.
4 days.
And I think they're both dead. Now it does, but You notice though, I was looking at one of the or one of the differences, but they're both dead and have been dead for some time. And if you're only dead, even if you can't breathe for 10 minutes, you're dead. Although I have heard stories of people that were thought to be dead and then something happened and they came to life. It was kind of startling to those around.
In the funeral home, they come to life and the kind of just startle the people to.
And it freaked me out.
So they both pray to God and say, bring more or less, restore this person to life. That happens to all of them. So what do we notice about, is there anything about Elisha that is similar? Maybe there's not. Maybe you don't see much similarities except that he brought someone back to life.
Well, their methods were different.
Okay, well, let's talk about the
That's
differences
right.
then. So
Uh-oh.
there's Elisha's story, or Jesus' story of Lazarus. But how about the differences then? So,
Well, Elijah and Elisha both actually got on top of him. It sort of sounds like they may have done some CPR and breathing because the mouth to mouth.
Elisha sounds like resuscitation, mouth to mouth.
But I mean, Elijah also got up and down on him like 3 times, laid his body on him. Whereas Jesus just cried out to God and then just yelled, "Lazarus, come out."
Okay. Why do you?
In Amy's book, she says that the Jews think that the soul stays with the body for 3 days and then it leaves.
On the
so
fourth
we wait
day.
for the 4th day to.
I had read somewhere that there was a custom for some culture where, like that, they'd wait 3 days and they'd check on you during those 3 days to see if you might still, because it's possible you might not really be dead. This is kind of like.
So maybe that's something that happened frequently, as people look like they were dead, but they were just really sick or something.
So
That's interesting. I've never heard that one.
So that was kind of along the lines of the Jewish belief that you kind of linger around. So I'd read somewhere that.
But they also bury you right away, if possible, within 24 hours.
Well, yeah, if you were. Well, that's 2 different stories, but.
It's a little bit scary.
So why do you think only Lazarus tells this? I mean, John tells the story of Lazarus. That's the only place it shows up. It's the kind of a big miracle. Why didn't the other 3 come up with something? I don't have answers, so.
That's a really good question. I thought about that last night a lot. Couldn't come up with.
No, apparently a story, whether true or otherwise, that was not circulating at the time Mark wrote his gospel, and then Matthew and Luke wrote theirs, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe
Mark didn't know about it.
I'm saying, yeah, probably. I would think he would have included it if it had been something he was
Different
aware of.
set of followers, so that the stories John heard were different than. Well, his gospel was a little different anyway.
Mhm.
Which is Mark.
Yeah.
Oh, John's is definitely different.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about the synoptic gospels because they all have borrow. Well, 2 of them borrow. Scholars think that Matthew and Luke borrow from Mark. They have some other sources besides Mark, but they're all seeing the same way on a lot of stuff. They change it to kind of emphasize things they want to emphasize versus what Mark did, but. Okay.
I'll tell you a real story.
A real story.
Something like this. I was a night nursing supervisor before I went back to graduate school, and it's a small hospital. So if we had a patient who was, about to expire, about to die, but was not a candidate for resuscitation, it was my job, when it happened, to go and examine them and pronounce them dead, so we could, start the process of getting the funeral home and all that. We had a lady that had kind of been in and out for a while, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, the nurse's aide called me and said, big older gal who was very wise to the ways of the world. And she said, might want to come over and check Mrs. So-and-so. And so I went in, and sure enough, she's perfectly still on the bed. I listened, you're supposed to listen to heart sounds and breath sounds. She had none of that. And so I headed back to the door, and I told Miss Berry, who was her name, I said, I'm going to go call the family. And she said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. She said, just stand here with me for a minute. And so we stood there, and after about 2 minutes, the lady took a big deep breath, and she was back alive again.
Was her skin still warm?
Yeah, she was still, I mean, she had like just stopped breathing when the aide called me, but she'd done this a couple of times before. I hadn't seen it happen.
Hold on.
I said, okay. So we'll hold off on calling the family.
Did she die while she was there?
She eventually did, yeah, for real.
So what?
I know when Sylvia died, she went very cold very quickly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, actually, I don't really recall that I felt for a pulse. I'm sure I touched her skin, so. But I don't remember feeling cold. No. But she definitely was not breathing, and there were no heart sounds, so.
You brought her back to life.
Maybe she just had sleep apnea.
Yeah. Well, that could be, but that, that doesn't account for the pulselessness and the absence of heart
true.
sounds. That was the strange part about it.
In her mind, she was saying, I
Yeah,
got you.
yeah. But I'll never forget that nurse's aide. She was so smart. And she said, I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Well, evidently she'd observed it.
I think
previously.
she'd been taking care of this lady for a while, so she kind of knew, I think, what she was doing. Young charge nurse, doesn't know anything.
Okay, here's a question for you. Elijah raised, and you may argue it because he wasn't raised dead very long, you think, but Elijah raised a child from the dead. And the mother told Elijah she knew he was a man of God, but if raising Lazarus is a sign of Jesus' divinity, why isn't Elijah considered to be divine? You're going to say he wasn't dead long enough, or?
Just hear the Leon.
Yeah.
Do these things, where Jesus just said, come on out.
Yeah, I was going to say CPR.
Maybe again, because of the difference in the circumstances and the fact that Jesus raised somebody who had been dead for 4 days, sort of elevates him above Elijah. So
But is Elijah considered divine because he was taken in a whirlwind up to God and at Pesa, they all wait for him to enter the house. I mean, they go answer the door for him to come in because Elijah is supposed to come back.
Maybe there's levels of divinity,
Maybe
he's a lower level.
Maybe because I mean, the Passover meals that I participated in, somebody goes and at midnight opens the door for Elijah to come in.
and then this is how theology develops.
Yeah.
I'm serious. Right here, this discussion we're happening, 2,000 years ago, the early church was talking about this and trying to sort it out.
Isn't there also a custom in or maybe you said that they set a chair?
Well, now I don't think at the Passover I went to, we set a chair for them, but they answered the door for them.
Okay. I thought there was a cut.
They often said a chair.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Levine says for a miracle to work, it should change those who receive it. So we'll start with Lazarus. How do you think it changed Lazarus after you've been dead 4 days and you come back, you're alive again? What do you think would be your attitude towards life and your attitudes, your future?
I imagine he was pretty, well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe he was amazed that if he was conscious of his death, I don't know. But I think more of.
But he would have found out from his sisters.
Yeah. I was going to say it was probably more life-changing for his sisters and his friends than it was basically maybe for himself.
Okay.
unless he learned some things while he was in Shell or
you know.
wherever he was during those 4 days.
Well, first of all, I guess one of my thoughts would be is you might say life is a gift, and I got a gift. So if you had the second chance, what would you do with your second chance?
I try to be a better disciple.
I'm just looking this up here because I thought that was an interesting question about why wasn't Elijah considered a Messiah? And the concept of Messiah was mostly developed during the Babylonian period, and Elijah lived a couple hundred years before that. So it may be that.
So the theologians hadn't come up with the idea yet.
Exactly. Yeah, I was say, had he been born a little bit later and done this, maybe he would have.
He was born ahead of his time.
He was born ahead of his time.
Well, and Messiah means anointed one, so I would think that Elijah and Elisha they were prophets, so.
Okay.
I don't know necessarily they were physically anointed, but they may have been considered anointed.
So
In reality, we have another chance every single day to make a difference in the world. Just because you're who you were yesterday doesn't mean you have to be who you are tomorrow.
I had my friend, I mentioned this for an offertory last week or the week before, where it was. Marvin Keltner was a good friend of mine, and he was much, he was, when he told me this, he was in his 80s, but he said, if I wake up in the morning, it's a good day. And that's kind of along your lines of take the day you've been given and be grateful for it and appreciate it and
Practice gratitude.
Jane isn't here, but I watched her movie that she liked so much, The Shawshank Redemption. And there was a guy in there, the Andy, this kind of the main character. But at one point he reaches he tells his friend Brad, it's time to get busy living or time to get busy dying. And that's kind of it's sort of along that lines of thought. It's there's others you've heard say advertisements,
Lazarus was supposed to be a pretty good guy anyway, wasn't he?
Well, I'm sure Martha and Mary thought he was.
Well,
And it says that he was the one Jesus loved.
Yeah.
That's what they what do you think it did to Martha and Mary having their brother back?
This story of the way Amy-Jill wrote it really brought some new thoughts to me last night on their relationship. I always knew they looked at life differently, but how differently I didn't realize until she wrote this up.
Okay.
But they were really crossways with each other. And in a way, it's part of what this miracle was all about.
Well,
bringing the family together.
Yeah, you're talking about crosswise in the story about Mary sitting at Jesus' feet.
All of it.
Yeah.
Their whole life and how she wrote it. I really appreciated that a lot.
Okay.
You see it all the time.
So what do you think about Lazarus being raised? What did that accomplish for their family then? What do you think?
I brought them together.
Okay.
Well,
And then she asked a question though, should somebody's death be the reason why we come back together? What do you think about that?
It may not be the reason, but it surely can be a part of it.
Shouldn't we be having before somebody dies?
It changes how you look at things.
Yeah.
Some cases it goes the opposite way.
Right.
It changes it for the worse.
Yeah.
Especially if there's money involved.
Exactly.
well, I guess my thought is what would happen to Mary and Martha if Lazarus wasn't raised from the dead, because women were basically who would take care of them. I imagine that Lazarus was provided for them. Because As I see it, Mary and Martha weren't married that I know
Well,
of.
you don't really know
Yeah,
their situation.
so if they weren't married, then they would be, their brother would be basically their guardian and provider.
But like,
So if they were married, they wouldn't be living with their brother.
Right,
but like Jeremy said, and Levine pointed out in her book, because he was buried in a tomb with a stone, they were well-to-do.
yeah.
So
Right.
I think,
Well, and I wonder what happens to the money. Would it go to Mary and Martha, or would it go to somebody else, and Mary and Martha would be left out in the cold?
the way that those stories were always presented in Sunday school is that the one that was doing the housework was kind of presented as the bad one, and the one that took care of Jesus was kind of presented as, that's the way the disciples ought to be, the good ones.
well, what did you think of Levine's pointing out the word used for Martha in that other story about Martha and Mary, just without Lazarus, where it says it could be that Martha was ministering, and they talk about the word minister in there versus doing household chores, which is the way you always hear it.
Yeah, well, I know my mother, who was a great housekeeper, would say, well, she's ministering to the people who visit her home, and it's comfortable and they're cared for and they get food and all that. While, the other sisters sitting out, talking with the men and with Jesus in particular. But I just wonder if this was kind of a lesson for her to, relax a little bit.
Well, when I read John before, I always thought that Martha was scolding Jesus for not coming sooner to save him.
Oh, I think that was,
But when you read it earlier, it sounded like it was less chiding, because then she said, but I believe that you can make it different.
well, I don't know if that reduced it for me. Well, let's jump up to that. I have a question about that. I'll skip all. We'll come back to these others, but in Luke, Martha is annoyed with Mary for sitting at Jesus' feet instead of helping her. In John, they're both of the same mind. They're mad at Jesus because he wasn't there when he should have been.
Mhm.
And then probably when they found out that he delayed 2 days deliberately, that probably just amped up the
Yeah, I
anger.
would be very upset.
So do you think their anger was warranted?
At the time, yes, but because as far as they're concerned, dead is dead, and he's been gone for 4 days and he's decomposing.
Well, the lesson too is, they were angry and it probably seemed warranted at the time. But the lesson is, God's going to work in God's own time.
Yeah,
And sometimes we have to just accept that.
You think they apologized to Jesus after Lazarus came out of the tomb?
oh, I'm sure they took good care of him, fed him well, and
Okay.
made sure he had a soft bed to sleep in.
Well, this was something that crossed my mind. I didn't really, do you think it changed Jesus raising Lazarus? Because it changed, to me, it seems like, well, I'm sure Lazarus and his sisters, because of what happened, would feel like life is, I've got this second chance. They've got a second chance to be with their brother. I mean, there's like Eloise is talking about, their relationships could all change. What about Jesus?
Last week and this week are two very different accounts of Jesus. Last week we have, Jesus who wasn't sure that his healing had worked the first time. And now we've got Jesus who raises people from the dead, even though they've been in the tomb for 4 days. That's a very different perspective that the two authors,
I was going to say, we got two different authors.
give about Jesus.
Hadn't he already raised the child from the dead?
Yes,
Yeah.
but
When
that
this
had been
happened?
a short time.
So
He hadn't
he,
been laying dead for 4 days.
so he, he was aware that he had the power, but this was his good friend. And so I imagine it had more of a meaning within his own heart to have Lazarus back. And he, if he was that good of friends with Lazarus and had been in the home, then, he was friends with Mary and Martha as well. So he knew that that would ease them as well as his own friendships with.
Well, because of that friendship, close friendship, it probably altered a little bit how he saw families reacting at this time.
Well, he didn't see a big reason to get back. You know, he stayed 2 more days, so it was almost kind of like, oh, it's all going to work out. You know, the whole point of this was to show God's power, and apparently he was trusting in God's power at that time, according to John.
Yeah,
I don't know that.
I'm still on Martha and Mary saying, what? You waited 2 days? If you'd gotten here 2 days ago, you'd been, you know. But that I'd been just like them. He would have gotten chewed out. And I probably within, as soon as it happened, I'd say, I apologize.
My bad.
My bad.
It looks like Lazarus was dead for 4 days when they got there, and he's waited for 2 days. Then even if he had started when they asked him to come, he still would have been dead by the time he got there.
Well, they sent a message. They didn't,
Yeah.
because I was trying to figure out the timetable. If he was 2 days away and got there and Lazarus was already dead 4 days, there must have been more distance involved because somebody carried the message to him.
Yeah.
Maybe by that time Lazarus had already died anyway. And Jesus waited 2 days and then came, and now it's 4 days since Lazarus died. So there's,
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying is that
Are you saying that because he'd already been 2 days, Jesus saying, well, 2 days, 4 days, what's the difference?
Jesus already knew he was dead.
well,
Well,
Is that
no,
what you're saying, or?
well, he knew he'd waited that, well,
Maybe God said, don't go yet.
I guess, let's go back to what it says. He was ill
Yeah,
when he got the message. Didn't say he was dead.
No, but I'm just saying, look at the timing. We'll kind of go to the part where it talks about the timing.
After hearing that Lazarus was
Maybe
ill,
the
he
next-
stayed 2 days longer.
Well,
And then we don't know how long it took him to get there.
Well,
But
and
when he
it
arrived,
also
he'd been dead 4 days.
it also says the illness wasn't supposed to
Right.
lead to death.
right.
Well,
That's interesting.
yeah, but what kind of death is he talking about? I guess is.
Because the
So
illness was-
you're saying he didn't think he was going to die? That he could
I
wait
don't
2
know.
days?
But
Maybe.
it points out that the illness does not lead to death, so.
Maybe
The illness was
maybe
to
like his
show God's
eternal
glory.
life was still assured or something.
I'm just, that's a good point though. Maybe he thought, he'll still be alive when I get there. I'll just heal him. He'll be returned to health. He won't be brought back from the dead.
No, I think he knew that by the time he got there, he would be physically dead to everybody, to everybody's knowledge. Because he said, it doesn't lead to death, rather it's for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. So I think he knew that Lazarus would be dead, but he was destined to raise Lazarus from the dead.
Okay, so maybe it's not eternal death, but just physical death.
Well,
Short term,
Maybe, well,
2 minute death.
why wouldn't if he
2 day
just
death.
healed him then showed God's glory?
This is more dramatic.
right.
More, it's a bigger miracle
Yeah.
than healing somebody that's still alive. And
Well, and Jesus still has his own death and resurrection to face, so.
okay,
People see that people can be raised from the dead, be raised from physical death, then when Jesus is raised from physical death, some of the followers already know the story. I guess it's my view. I don't know.
well, anyway, Martha said he stinks. So
This is, we decided John was a Pauline, right? Then when we did the book.
yeah, I think we did.
Interesting use of the word collapsed time.
What do you think she meant by collapse time?
Destroying time. Time doesn't matter anymore.
Mhm.
Anyone,
Okay.
because you're going to live forever, right?
So that's kind of what she talks about in eternal life. Means, does eternal life start now?
I believe so.
Okay. I thought that was the point she made, was eternal life means something now. So people talk about being saved, but eternal life can start before you die, right? That's what I'm saying.
What's that big word?
Yeah.
Realized
Eschatology. Eschatology is kind of like dealing with
In time.
end times, end of an age, last days. So it's kind of,
So you're saying that rather than this life being one age and eternity being another age, the collapse time is bringing the two together.
well, I kind of
so to
wondered about
speak.
that. Yeah.
He's raising him from the dead now rather than raising him from the dead, you know, in eternity.
Well, or the age of resurrection.
Well, yeah, because Martha said, well, yeah, I believe in resurrection,
Yeah, the day of resurrection.
you know, that he's going to be raised later.
Mhm.
That's what she said. Jesus says, well, basically Jesus says,
So the
well,
collapse
I'm going
time is
to
raising-
raise him now. Well, I mean, that's what he did.
So that's the collapse time, is rather than raising him later, raising him now.
Because I think the resurrection is supposed to be one appointed time when everybody's raised from the dead, from what I kind of understood.
What would you were a physicist, right?
Mhm.
In an earlier life.
In the real life, yes.
So what would collapse time mean to a physicist? I mean, thinking of time from a physicist standpoint.
Well, I think of God as eternal insofar as only matter is affected by time. And so if God is not made of matter, but is spiritual, then there is no such thing as time. The time is measured by
Humans?
atoms moving and
Okay.
things like that. And so therefore, once you're dead and no longer matter,
I don't know.
that is eternity, because there is no such thing as time. Time has no meaning. You don't have atoms to move around and make time.
That kind of goes back to to Genesis when it says, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day unto the Lord.
Right.
Well, if we believe eternal life is something happens now, does that change how we live?
It should. Does
I
it
think-
say it does? No.
I was gonna say, yeah, some people that they may have changed, they just continue on their way. But it should.
I heard one time, one theory of hell was that when you die, and if you've had a vice all your life, just a simple example is cigarettes, and you die, you still crave cigarettes, but you can't get them. So it's, and it could be anything that's a vice for you, something that, that would be to you would be a living hell.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think that's very consistent with the message of Jesus that God's kingdom had come,
Okay.
not something that was yet far off, but something that was present. But that's why I'm confused about what John really was the Apolline or Petrine, because this is more of a Petrine belief.
I was going to ask you, so was
And-
Jesus a Petrine?
Yeah, and,
That was my
and so,
question.
Paul was more kind of the kingdom is, the return of Jesus is yet to come. He was very very forward looking, but not that it's necessarily here now.
Now he was criticizing the Petrines for the way they were living,
Yeah.
which, okay, so let's go to, if I got a question.
Well, I think Jesus wanted people to act as if they, already were in God's kingdom on this earth. My dad used to say that when I do something childish and say, "Come on, kid, act like you've been here before."
So did Jesus think they were living, when Jesus was alive, they were living in Messianic age before his crucifixion? So this would be a Petrine idea, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
Well, how about for a period there? How about after his crucifixion? Did they kind of throw away that idea and say, "Oh, I was wrong"? And then
Well, I
when they
think
have believed in his resurrection, then they said, "Whoops, I guess I was right in the first place."
Yeah, I think in terms of what happened to the disciples, I've always kind of taken the story to mean that it took the resurrection to really open their eyes and
For it to sink in.
kind of let it sink in what Jesus had been telling them all along. And then they probably reflected and say, oh yeah, he did say that, didn't he?
So I'm kind of like Paul, you were saying, it seems to be a Petrine belief.
Yeah.
So Jesus seems to be a Petrine more to me than Pauline. So we think we're living in a messianic age now. Could we be?
We could.
I think that's a matter of personal attitude. I think there are people who live their lives in such a way that they probably would say, I'm living in the messianic age. But to look at the world around us and say that, you know, as a world, as planet Earth, are we in the messianic age? It probably wouldn't be so apparent.
Okay. I go to this last one. We already did that. Levine didn't really care for this one. This event was for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. She says, if people have to suffer so that the glory of God can be revealed, she's going to look for a different God. Would you agree with her? Would that be? I mean, I'm kind of inclined to side with doing her attitude there. It's like,
That's a very realistic attitude.
Does that kind of go back to the old agency thing? You know, where everybody has their own, you know, the world's been set in motion and you have the choices you want to make. And if you want to go down a path that's going to hurt you, you know.
I think that feeds into the difficulty that some people who would claim to be an atheist would share as their reason for not believing in God is because they don't understand the problem of suffering.
Yeah.
How does God, you know, raise somebody from the dead and answer the prayers of this family, and yet every day people around the world are dying, you know, horrible deaths that don't have any relief from that. I was kind of in my mind contrasting what happened here with what Paul says in one of his letters, I think, to the Corinthians, and he's talking about writing his letter with big letters because his eyes were bad. He said, I petitioned God 3 times that he would heal my eyesight. And his answer was, no, I'm going to leave you with poor eyesight because the things that you will do, even with your infirmity, will speak to my glory, speak to the glory of God. So it's kind of the opposite here. Here's a great miracle that speaks to the glory of God. And yet Paul says his absence of healing was a way to speak to the glory of God. So which is it? You know, is it one? Is it both?
And you look at the story of Job too. And, you know, he was a godly man, but then all this stuff happened to him.
And the lesson there is that he just persisted. He just continued on and accepted life as it was. And, you know, it turned out well in the end, but for a while it was pretty difficult.
yeah, I've always had a little problem with, a big problem with some of the things that happened to Job. But it's not like, okay, so all his family and his wife and children all died, and he gets a new wife, a new family, and it's like, well, yeah, but he lost the family still. I've never thought that was like everything was perfect again. He lived through all that. He still has that in his memory, his experience. So I've never thought he really got everything was restored to him exactly. Even though that's kind of the way it comes out in the story is,
Yeah.
well, everything he got, he has many cattle, sheep, all this stuff. Well, that's one thing, but your family that you had, so I've had a little problem with Job in that respect of he wasn't restored to where he was before all this happened to him.
And was that basically a story because wasn't the debate that he must have done something wrong because he was punished with all this stuff, and that was basically the debate of the whole.
Well, that's what
With
his
the joke.
friend said, but
Yeah.
he denied it all. He said, I didn't do anything. Okay, so Mary weeps and Jesus weeps. Why does Jesus weep if he knows he can raise Lazarus?
He's sympathetic.
He's sympathetic with Mary and Martha. Okay.
He knows they're hurt because of their brother's death and that Jesus delayed coming.
If Jesus weeps, does God weep?
According to the Doctrine and Covenants.
Okay.
What did you say?
Amy-Jill
What
Levine
did you
says,
say? Oh, he asked
So,
if God
does God weep?
wept, and he says it says in the Doctrine
According
and
to the
Covenants.
Doctrine and
So-
Covenants, one of the recent
when does God weep? So here we are.
I imagine he's weeping a lot right now.
So this is only one of the reasons why that comes in the Doctrine and Covenants, why God weeps.
I think sometimes, and I've always believed that there's a God that we don't understand, and then there's a God that we assign human characteristics to help our understanding. That's called
Yeah.
anthropomorphism
Yeah.
in literature.
Yeah.
And I think when we say that God weeps, that's an anthropomorphistic term that's being used to really express the pain that's in our heart. And we interpret that as God's pain.
Yeah. Well, we say God's sitting on his throne. There's no throne.
No.
That's just
Again, very human.
an image we've created in our
Yeah,
minds.
those images of, sitting in a huge, what do you call it? Throne room, I guess, yeah. Sitting on a throne is, that's right out of the Roman courts, the Roman
Yeah.
beliefs about, what kings should live like.
I mean, we use all sorts of devices that makes God into a person because that's
Yeah.
the way we think.
And I always go back to what Norman Bernauer used to say, how big is your God? Are you limiting God to being a king on a throne, or is God somehow much greater than that?
I thought it was interesting. This last line of the doctrine, that verse in Doctrine and Covenants, is very similar to this is just trivia, to a verse in Jeremiah where it says, "For in its welfare you will find your welfare." That's real close to what the Doctrine and Covenants says. Back to the if God weeps or if God didn't weep, what would that? And Amy-Jill calls this a belief that God would not be weep. He would become, in Greek thought, the unmovable mover. So it doesn't matter what happens to you, it isn't going to change. It doesn't change God. So isn't that the consequence then of believing God doesn't weep? You get this kind of, well, he's kind of like the guy in Marvel. He just nothing affects him.
Well, going back to Mark, though, I mean, I think, and I know this is John, but Mark kind of always tried to present the human side of Jesus.
Yeah.
More so maybe than the
He becomes more relatable.
God side of it. Yeah.
Okay. So I had what else? Well, there's other things, war, famine, all these things. Probably just the fact that we don't respond the way God wants us to respond is enough to make him weep. So this is one of a comparison to the Synoptic Gospels, where Levine says that the Synoptic Gospels, you have to have trust or faith before the miracle takes place. And she cites an example, or in the Gospels, where Jesus couldn't perform any miracles in that place because of unbelief of the people. But she points out that in John, miracles lead to having faith in Jesus. And here's when he turns the water into wine. It says that his disciples then believed in him when they saw this first sign of his, this first miracle. And I kind of, John and Mark, there's things going on between these guys. So John uses signs and wonders to cause people to have faith. And then Mark's Jesus says, why are you asking for a sign? No sign will be given. What's going on? I mean, why are these guys like, to me, they're coming from different viewpoints of what the,
Well, they were, and when the, Bible was canonized, I mean, that's what the bishops or the priests or whoever gathered together to do that little exercise. Each brought their own favorite. This is my favorite book. I'm a Marxist, or I'm a Johnist, or whatever. And so that, they finally compromised and accepted multiple versions of the story to satisfy, the people that were part of that council.
any other thoughts?
I think when Jesus says no sign will be given, it goes back to the story of the rich man and Lazarus. That, even if he sends his brother back from the dead, they won't believe him. I mean, so that's
Good.
so no sign will be given because they wouldn't believe him anyway.
Well, there would have been no Marley's ghost in the Christmas story.
Right.
Of course, he didn't change him. He just told him that he had to live through 3 different Christmases.
I'll say, okay, so
With all these chains on him. And,
so I mean, this kind of comes down, what should be the basis for our faith? Should signs and wonders, if you've never seen one, what would be the basis of your faith? So
Well, for some people, that's important. I can think of, Pentecostal churches where they handle snakes and, consider it to be a sign and a wonder if they don't get bit and poisoned and die.
or if they do get bit and they still survive.
So
Always kind of,
for some, I think there are people that kind of fall on both sides of that.
when you do that, doesn't it come close to what Jesus was out in the wilderness? And makes me think, aren't you basically?
Well, but I think they're basing it on the
There's a
thing
scripture.
that if you're bit by a snake, you won't die
Yeah.
because you have faith. So I think that's what they based it on.
And if you do die, the last thing you're thinking is, I guess I didn't have faith.
I guess.
Well, and all the TV
Or enough
preachers,
faith.
over the years that have, done healings on TV and
Yeah.
put their hand on the person and push them back or whatever.
You healed when they fall down.
Is there anything we didn't cover in the chapter that you wanted to bring up that we haven't talked about? I'll give you guys, you can get the last. We've got a few minutes, so
Well, I was bad and didn't read the chapters, so I don't know if anything was missed.
okay.
I think in maybe other chapters, but certainly in other books, she does a better job. The author does a better job of kind of relating what's going on in the story to Judaism, to her Jewish beliefs. And that always made a lot of sense to me when she develops those connections. I kind of felt like she struggled with this chapter a little bit in trying to make sense of it. Is that, I don't know how you.
I was kind of felt like there's she's done better on
some of the other books.
in some of her other books.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of loose ends. Still don't understand any more better than I did before we started.
Well, there's only one more chapter, and it's a really short one. The conclusion. I think it's only now you won't have an excuse next week, Coral, because I think it's only got 4 pages.
Oh, I might be able to get that.
Or 6.
Me too.
Anyway, it's a real short chapter, so
I know Jonathan couldn't be here today. He wasn't feeling well. He was planning to be here for class and then had a family thing to do after that. But I know he's wanting to know what people are thinking about a next course of study since we'll be done with this. We'll have a couple weeks off for the holiday. We won't, have Sunday school for Christmas and New Year's. And then we'll start again in January. So if anybody has any ideas or thoughts that you want to share now, are we recording this today? I assume that Jonathan will go back and listen to it. Hopefully.
we're on Zoom, so I assume it's being
Okay. Kenifa usually sets it up to record, so, but if anybody has ideas or just topic areas that you're interested in, I know Jonathan would probably like to hear those.
What about faith?
Faith,
Mhm.
more,
Just what about it?
more about faith.
Just what about it?
What about faith? Okay.
Have faith.
And faith.
I know we were, one of the things in some emails that was going back and forth, John Hamer, who is a 70, I believe, in the church with the Toronto congregation, teaches, I think Sunday evening or maybe Tuesday evening, there's one evening a week, he teaches a class on all different kinds of topics. Some of them are on ancient history, some are on scriptural things, some are on Mormonism, and they're all very interesting. They take about an hour. But Jonathan wondered about maybe showing one of those, and then the next week, come back and discuss what our questions were, what we thought we learned, what we agreed or didn't agree with. And John's very smart. He's, I think, taken a lot of college courses or something in ancient history. He seems to really understand and know what he's talking about. So that would be a possibility.
I always thought I thought that'd be hard to teach.
Yeah, it might be, and maybe it would.
You watch,
flop, I don't know.
I mean, you're kind of and the class is kind of passive for one Sunday, and then you have to remember what you saw the previous Sunday. You discussed the next. I kind of thought that.
Well, we could maybe
Might be an issue.
Maybe we could do 30 minutes and have discussion one Sunday and then finish it the
I
following
don't know.
Sunday or something.
Well,
Maybe
somebody'd
there's
have to think about how
some
you
other ways
work
to do that. But, yeah, and then plus, people might be here one Sunday and not the next, and so they would miss out.
But I know he's done a lot of lectures on a wide range of subjects. So.
Any other books of the Bible that you're interested in learning more about, or so we got
Well, we
faith?
haven't really touched John all that much, or at least since I've been here. I don't know if you've touched John in the past.
Can't recall that we have necessarily.
Not specifically.
We did a
So
book
Paul,
a few years ago.
Oh, Karen,
several years ago.
hey Dennis. So, what would you think about doing the one that you watch for an hour kind of as our homework and then discussing it on Sunday?
well, that'd be a different way to do it. Because everybody's got a computer at home or a smartphone. They can go to Hamer's lectures themselves.
We could post the link, send the links out.
Yeah, that'd be good,
Then
because it
people
might be
wouldn't have
kind of
to-
hard to find a
Yeah,
specific
people wouldn't have
one
to
you
go
wanted
searching
to.
around YouTube. Jonathan could get the link and send it to everybody. That's a possibility.
So that would, I think, work better than if you were going to show up in class, although it would be fresh in your mind.
And maybe the teachers could come with some pre-prepared discussion points or questions or something. That would make it a little bit easier for us in a way.
To me, it would be kind of like reading the chapter at home.
Right.
Might be easier.
Penny said that might be easier, Karen.
Maybe we need an audio book.
I was going to say, I wonder if I could find it on audio.
Well, I know long time ago, the class studied about different religions, but I really wasn't in it at that time, and I wondered if that's something people might be interested in going back and looking at.
I wasn't here when they did.
Jonathan taught that, I think,
Yeah.
and it was interesting.
It was very
He sometimes even brought in people, friends of his that were, Jewish or Muslim
Yeah.
or something to answer questions.
That was really a
Yeah.
good.
That was very good.
Yeah, he was teaching that, and I think he had people he worked with, that came and answered questions.
Well, I know when I took the religious history courses at JCCC, I had to go to a different religion, and I went to the Buddhist temple one on the plaza. Well, the Buddhist wasn't really, well, it was at the,
You mean Temple Slug?
You mean Unity
yeah,
Temple?
Unity. They have a Buddhist service there. And then I went to a Muslim what do they call theirs?
We went to a mosque.
A mosque, down
With their Friday prayers or something.
to one of their sermons. It was a little hard because some of it was in Arabic. It was kind of mixed.
I
But
think
yeah,
it
they did the prayers.
might even be kind of fun to learn what different Christian religions believe.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different denominations. If we chose some of the major ones, maybe, and
Or,
took a
some
look.
of the minor ones.
Yeah,
Or the ones that were formed around the same time our church was.
Okay, I guess put on your thinking caps, try to come up with some suggestions and